Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is one of the most densely packed, enriching experiences that manages to take a game that's already a masterpiece and somehow create an expansion that's even better. What do you do when you're tasked with following up one of the greatest games of this generation? Well, with FromSoftware, the answer is simple. Just set the bar even higher. Shadow of the Erdtree has been out for a bit now, and I finally made it through everything the expansion has to offer. I've killed every boss, I've explored every area and completed every quest I could, and I loved every second of it. This video isn't going to be a review. You can already find dozens of spoiler-free reviews telling you how good this DLC is. So today I'm just gonna dive into everything that makes up this DLC. And yes, it's a lot harder than the base game, and while I don't think it's too hard to the point it deserves a review bomb, I do think there are some points worth discussing around it. But the bottom line here is I think this DLC is a masterpiece. I mean, everything here just fires on all cylinders. It takes the core design aspects of the base game, improves on some components, and weaves it all into a tighter, more focused expansion that still manages to have more content than most AAA offerings. It took me around 45 hours to complete everything in this DLC, and for $50 that's more content than I think anyone expected, even for this game. Shadow of the Erdtree is everything great about Elden Ring taken to new heights. Difficulty aside, what this DLC has achieved here is quite impressive, so let's talk about it. And also, quick disclaimer, this video will contain spoilers for literally everything in Shadow of the Erdtree, so if you haven't beat it yet, leave. Or if you don't care, that's cool I guess, but anyway, spoilers ahead, let's get into it. Right off the bat, when entering the Land of Shadows, I was hit with this nostalgic trip to my first playthrough of Elden Ring. It was good to be back. Once again, I had the same feeling of imposing wonder, another daunting realization of how massive the scale of everything is. I mean, Miyazaki himself said this DLC was only going to be the size of Limgrave, but a bit more densely packed, which was a fucking lie, cause this shit's at least the size of Limgrave, Caelid, and Liurnia combined. And it's all more densely packed than thought possible. The design of the world here also uses verticality even more effectively than the base game. This map is so layered that pretty much anywhere you can look over a cliff or up a mountain and see new areas both above and below you, and the paths to get to these areas aren't obvious, but when you do eventually figure it out and get there, it's incredibly fulfilling. Finding your way through the bottom of this winding ravine below the gravesite plains and discovering that it leads to this gorgeous blue-hued Solarian coast that you could see from the starting area is just one example of how well crafted the exploration is here. Some of the coolest areas and content are also once again obscurely hidden. Getting to the slightly horrifying but atmospheric abyssal woods requires that you first find a secret entrance behind a waterfall in the Shadowkeep, which then leads to a room that requires you to find an illusory wall that leads to a coffin that you can lay in, which takes you to the ravine below the Shadowkeep. And once you're in this ravine, you then have to find your way down 2 waterfalls and a cliff face to a well-hidden catacomb, and only then do you find one of the coolest looking areas in the game. The exploration here just takes everything the base game does so well and dials it up to 11. And man, I can't not mention the art direction here. I'm just gonna let the footage speak for itself. The story of this DLC has us follow Miquella as we're trying to find out where he's going and what he's up to. And through a number of new NPCs, quests, and bosses, the story is far more prominent and easy to follow here compared to the base game. There are multiple quests stemming from different bosses and lore bits from the base game that builds onto it in an interesting way. Whether it's Thalier, who's looking for Miquella's other half, Saint Trina, or a former follower of Radahn, Freya, trying to learn what Miquella and Radahn's pact was, or the Dragon Priestess, who sends you to slay the Dragon Lord Placidux's oldest enemy, Baal the Dread. The quests are a great tie-in to the base game and lead to some really cool areas, items, and lore revelations, and they were a joy to work through. As for new gameplay additions, where do I start? There's over 100 new weapons to find with 8 new weapons classes and a bunch of new spells, incantations, talismans, and armor stats to drip out your character with. Of the new weapon types, light greatswords have quickly become my personal favorite. But great katanas, backhand blades, and the kung fu fists are also incredibly fun to use and build around. Finding cool and useful items is crucial to exploration, and there's certainly a lot here worth discovering. Throughout the DLC, you'll also be fighting a variety of new and old enemies, along with some slight variations of older enemies as well. And one common complaint in the base game that this DLC improves on is how hard it is to upgrade multiple weapons without having to farm for runes. So to rectify this, the smithing stones have become a pretty common drop from enemies and loot around the world. By just playing the game, you end up collecting enough smithing stones to upgrade a few extra weapons that you might want to try out. And aside from all this great new stuff, what's perhaps the most contentious gameplay addition is how your character power scales here. The decision to introduce a new power scaling mechanic built around collecting, Erdtree fragments. Okay, apparently this means shadow tree in Old English. Let's just go with that. Shadow fragments is a great way of putting all players on the same playing field, whether they have level 300 character or level 90 character. And you should still definitely not touch this content until you're at least level 120. I recommend 150, but the point is, this new system gives everyone the same experience with the intended difficulty level, regardless of your character level and New Game Plus cycle. And I'm not sure if this is a hot take or not, but I like this system. It makes the DLC more accessible to players who might only have a high level character and don't want to start from scratch with a new one. You can just jump in and still have a similar difficulty level. It also makes exploration and finding these upgrade fragments essential if you want to stand a chance against any of the bosses here. And it's not hard to find them as they're kind of scattered all over the place. I can understand, however, players who don't like how much the difficulty and progression are tied to finding these fragments. But the very first lesson you're taught in the game, from the first tree sentinel to Margit, is to explore, find weapons, level up, and come back stronger to overcome obstacles. And that's exactly what this DLC reinforces. One thing in particular that I think was a great improvement to the base game was how side dungeons were implemented. In the base game, you can find dozens of caves, catacombs, and mines absolutely everywhere, and finding them was certainly rewarding, but they did suffer from feeling repetitive in their design and their boss encounters after a while. But there were a handful of exceptions to this, as some of the dungeons were larger and more uniquely crafted, and that's the approach that FromSoft took here for the entirety of this DLC. Instead of having maybe 5 to 7 small, samey dungeons in each area, there are far fewer, but they are much larger and intricate, and each of them stands out from the other. And I much prefer this approach, as I'm a firm believer in quality over quantity. Now on to the major legacy dungeons, all of which are fantastic. The first one you'll likely visit is Ballarat, a sprawling castle accessible right off the bat, and it's full of deadly new enemies and is a well-designed dungeon with multiple paths and secrets to find, and it was very enticing to work through. Castle Entis is where you'll likely end up next, and it's a small but deadly keep with magic-themed enemies and leads you to the next major area of the DLC. And in classic Elden Ring fashion, there are some absolutely amazing minor dungeons that are completely optional, that house some of the coolest bosses in the game. Stonefisher is short, but leads to a very atmospheric boss fight and lore discovery as you find St. Trina at the end of it. Midra's Mansion is this well-hidden, creepy mansion that's haunted by the fucking Lord of Frenzied Flame. But back to the main story content, the standout legacy dungeon here has to be the Shadow Keep. It's a huge, interwoven, layered castle that I think rivals some of the best dungeons in the entire game. The dark, shadowy visual design creates this really cool atmosphere, and the design of this place is huge and complex, with multiple different paths leading to multiple different places. You can enter the keep 2 different ways, and both of them lead to different places. There are 3 different remembrance bosses just hidden at the end of 3 of these paths. You can find a bridge to the next main area, and a secret coffin that eventually leads to the Abyssal Woods. And all of these paths intersect in this vertically sprawling library, and it's all so intricate and interconnected and well crafted. I was impressed. Anir Elim as the climax of this DLC and the final destination doesn't disappoint either, with a similar vibe and visual design to Farum Azula, working through the branching paths, finding a bunch of hidden areas to drop down to, leading to some decent gear, and ultimately making it to the top of this floating angelic castle to face one of the toughest bosses in the game was a memorable experience, to say for sure. But overall, I'd say FromSoft doesn't miss when it comes to dungeons. The layout and design of each of them are just outstanding, and absolutely live up to the standard Elden Ring set. Okay, now let's talk about the real crux of this DLC's difficulty, its bosses. And I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in boss design here and hyperanalyze attack patterns and decide how fair or balanced they are. I'm just going to talk about how memorable each remembrance boss was, how hard it was for me to beat, and how much bullshit was detected. Starting with the first boss we've all likely fought, the Dancing Lion is a tough fight, especially just starting out in the DLC, where you won't have many shadow fragments. This motherfucker relentlessly attacks you with some long ass combo strings and leaves very small windows to attack and heal. And safe to say, I struggled a good bit with this boss, even with the NPC summon. But overall, it's a good fight, and killing him was triumphant as fuck. There's also another one of these guys just kinda hanging out in the raw ruins, and from what I could tell, he has the exact same moveset, but I killed him in 2 tries since I was a lot stronger by that point. Anyway, now over to R'Lana, another aggressive ass boss with some long ass combos. This boss was my first real roadblock and kinda sent me down a tilted spiral, which led me to stop and explore some other areas to get stronger, before trying again and still struggling. But I eventually got good and fucked her ass up. She's a cool boss that's very aggressive, but ultimately is a fair fight.
Oh my god! Oh, that took way too long. Jesus Christ. That took like so many tries.
Moving on to the Shaded Castle bosses, Commander Gaius is by far the worst boss out of all of them, and potentially in the entire game, and this can all be attributed to a single attack he has. The hitbox on his bullet charge is straight up broken. The best way to dodge it, from what I could tell, is to roll through it, except that even a perfectly timed roll will still take 2/3 of your health bar most of the time. It's inconsistent and frustrating, and he does this move a lot. It's like he knows that this is some straight up bullshit and he's abusing it. Anyway, it's the worst boss in the game. I was so tilted, I whipped out the Mimic Tier, which was 100% justified. I don't want to hear about it from you Souls purists. I can play the game how I want, and if Gaius is gonna pull out some bullshit, so will I.
Okay, didn't want to do this, but this is what it's come to. This bullshit can't continue. Ow. Oh yeah, okay. God. Like, what the fuck, man? I rolled right through that. That's bullshit. And alright. I need to do that. What the hell? I can't see. Hello? Okay, yeah, do your thing. Do your thing, Mimic here. Fuck this boss. Fuck my pride. Not worth it. It's not gonna actually make a difference, actually, turns out, because I'm still gonna fucking die. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my. Come on, baby. Finish him! Oh my god, I missed. Yes! Oh my god! Holy shit!
Anyway, the Shadow Tree Avatar is another boss that's hidden in the Shadow Keep, and is a pretty easy fight, especially if you've got fire or magic damage. You've got to kill 3 different health bars, so it's more of an endurance test, but there's not much to say here. Not the coolest boss, but not bad in any way. Now moving on to the main boss of the Shadow Keep, Mesmer is a pretty cool character lore-wise, and his fight was tough, but pretty enjoyable. He's again very aggressive, and learning his moveset and attack windows aged me 10 years and made me want to rip my hair out. But finally killing him was a feeling better than sex, and I've never felt more accomplished in anything in my entire life. Sad but true.
Yes! Oh my god!
Anyway, up next, one of the many wonderfully crafted quests in the game leads you to scale this giant mountain and hunt down Plaxidus's nemesis, Baal the Dread. And this boss has just such a fascinating story around it, and the fight itself is great too. Baal's attacks are more in line with the base game's pace rather than some of the non-stop aggressive patterns that most of the bosses have. Which is a good thing, but the fight was tough and the dopamine spike still hit when I killed him. On a similar note, Midra, the Lord of Frenzied Flame, is another great boss with some cool lore surrounding him. He's tough but incredibly fair, and every death was a clear mistake on my part that I was able to learn from. I also love how creepy the atmosphere, the whole forest, and the mansion was leading up to him. Very cool boss. And up next on the list is Matir, the Mother of Fingers, fought at the end of a very interesting quest. This one didn't give me much trouble, but is a decent spectacle and a satisfying reward for doing the quest. Now on to the boss that's guarding the final dungeon of the DLC. Romina is another good fight that's got a cool, vibrant, flowery scarlet wrought design that suits the lush palette of the ruins, and was an enjoyable fight overall. Her moveset was a bit tough to get down, but I eventually did it and killed her ass. And that leaves us with the final boss of the DLC, and potentially one of the hardest in the entire game, Radahn, Consort of Miquella. Fighting this boss is an experience that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Radahn's first phase is very reasonable. His attack patterns have some tricky timing, but they're easy enough to get down. But once a third of his health bar is gone, he gets imbued with Miquella and becomes the sole root of everyone's depression. I don't even want to know how many tries this took me because I lost count. Radahn's second phase is just this clusterfuck of light beam attacks that are extremely difficult to dodge. There's a lot of visual clutter on screen at all times, and this fight just made me want to jump headfirst into a brick wall and light myself on fire, because that would be less painful than fighting this boss. So after hours of growing increasingly mentally unstable, I eventually succumbed to the voices telling me to cheese. So I respec to this Unga Bunga Asmongold shield poke build and was actually able to stand a chance. Is it a bit cheesy? Yeah. Do I give a fuck? No. This fucker got what was coming to him, and when he died, children were singing in the streets. But yeah. While being a cool boss conceptually, a resurrected Radahn as the final boss seemed a bit underwhelming story-wise. Up until I discovered his second phase, I thought for sure he was just going to be a precursor to the Miquella boss fight, which isn't the case, but it's not something I'm too disappointed by. It just felt a bit underwhelming as the end of the story here. Okay, by now everybody knows that this DLC is hard. I just went on a rant about how mentally deteriorating the difficulty was at times. But is it too hard to the point where people should review bomb it? Surprisingly, my answer is no. Again, I think the main crux of the difficulty here comes down to two things: the Erdtree fragment system and the boss's aggressive design. And by the way, I'm in no means the best at these games. I wouldn't even say I'm good at them. It's taken me over 20 to 30 tries for 95% of the remembrance bosses, and I'm terrible at reading telegraphed attacks, and it takes me way too long to get the timing down. And yes, everything here hits like a truck and will absolutely murder you quickly if you don't have at least 50 vigor and as many fragments as possible. But like I said before, exploration is a core part of the game. The very first thing you're taught when facing Margit is to go somewhere else and get stronger when you hit a brick wall. And why shouldn't that remain consistent in this DLC? You do need to find these fragments, and they're not particularly hard to find, so of course the difficulty is going to be hard if you aren't collecting them. Fighting the Dancing Lion was tough. He hits like a freight train and has a ton of health, but by the time I fought the second one that's chilling near the end of the expansion, I was the one hitting like a truck, and I killed him in 2 tries. And with all that said, it is okay to not like this fragment system. It essentially makes your character level mostly obsolete, but you can't say the game's too hard if you're not utilizing it. But that's not the only thing that makes this DLC hard. The majority of the bosses, especially the main bosses, are a lot more aggressive and have much longer attack strings compared to the rest of the game. And attack windows are also a lot smaller, which makes it difficult to get heals in and do a lot of damage between attacks. And this is inherently a huge difficulty spike. I struggled a lot trying to learn to dodge the relentless combo attacks that bosses like Renala and Mesmer dish out. And okay, yes, not liking this design aspect is valid, but at the end of the day, if you want to beat this, you still have to get good and learn. You also have access to Spirit Ashes, NPC summons, and a variety of strong builds that you can respec into, which absolutely can make it a bit easier. And if you're someone who says the difficulty is too hard to the point it's not fun, but is also not using summons or magic and claiming that using anything except a stick and a ham sandwich to play the game is cheating, and you're playing the game wrong, then just stop. You can get mad at me saying this, but your self-imposed restrictions are not the 10 commandments of Souls games, and while there's nothing wrong with having them, and you can still make valid points about this DLC's difficulty, I'm just saying there's a lot of ways to play this game, and if yours isn't ideal for this content, then you either gotta get good or experiment with some other playstyles and develop strategies to overcome the challenge. I personally don't use Spirit Ashes, except for you Commander guys, you stupid asshole. I'm running a Dex Faith hybrid build with a suboptimal stat spread, because I like to have a variety of weapons available, and this DLC kicked my ass and was stressful and hard and was everything. But for each boss I struggled with, and I struggled for most of them, I tried again and again and again. I developed strategies to beat each one, trying different weapons, learning attack patterns, and when I finally was able to beat it, that feeling of triumph and victory was euphoric. And isn't that what these games are all about? Without difficulty, the core of a Souls experience falls apart, and after all, the harder the squeeze, the sweeter the juice. So yes, this DLC is hard, but no, I don't think it's too hard, and it's okay to disagree with me. If you think I'm wrong about everything I just said, then that's cool. Tell me why in the comments. This is, after all, just one idiot's opinion. In the end, Shadow of the Erdtree surpassed the standard that Elden Ring set. It presents another absolutely massive world with new challenges to overcome, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Shadow of the Erdtree is exactly what a good expansion should be. It builds off the base game's core design aspects and presents a fresh, tighter experience that's worthy of its price tag. Some bullshit aside, this DLC is a masterpiece, and I can't wait to see what FromSoft does next. Anyway, that's it for me. Bye.